Imagine a thriving metropolis, glittering with gold and overflowing with pleasure, instantly reduced to a silent graveyard of ash and sulfur by a rain of fire from the heavens. This is not merely a legend of destruction, it is the most terrifying ultimatum ever delivered to mankind. A chilling reminder that the line between divine mercy and absolute judgment is thinner than a breath. Why did a single backward glance turn a woman into a pillar of salt forever? What dark secrets lurked behind the walls of Sodom that forced even angels to blind a violent mob? Today, we uncover the shocking truth behind the catastrophe of Sodom and Gomorrah, a story of survival, intercession, and the deadly cost of compromise. Before we step into this fiery revelation, make sure you don't miss any of our prophetic deep dives by subscribing to Guardians of the Covenant, smashing that like button, and sharing this video to spread the truth. Now, prepare your heart and open your eyes, for the sky is darkening, the judgment is coming, and the only rule for survival is never look back. Imagine a thriving metropolis, glittering with gold, overflowing with pleasure, and pulsing with the arrogance of invincible power, instantly reduced to a silent graveyard of ash and sulfur by a rain of fire from the very heavens. This is not merely a legend of ancient destruction, but the most terrifying ultimatum ever delivered to mankind, a chilling reminder that the line between divine mercy and absolute judgment is thinner than a breath. Why did a single backward glance turn a fleeing woman into a pillar of salt, freezing her forever in a moment of tragic hesitation? And what dark, unspeakable secrets lurked behind the high walls of Sodom that forced even the angels of God to strike a violent mob with instant blindness? Today, we uncover the shocking truth behind the catastrophe of Sodom and Gomorrah, a story of survival, intercession, and the deadly cost of compromise. So before we step into this fiery revelation, make sure you don't miss any of our prophetic deep dives by subscribing to Guardians of the Covenant, smashing that like button, and sharing this video to spread the truth. Long before the fire fell, in the early days of a world reborn, there was a land fertile with hope, for the earth was still young, fresh from the purifying waters of the great flood, where rivers once again ran freely through the valleys, mountains held the scent of the rain that had washed the world, and the horizon seemed to breathe a renewed hope as creation silently bowed before the divine promise that never again would destruction come through water. The bow in the clouds recalled the covenant between the Creator and humanity, and in this new dawn, God looked upon a faithful servant, a man of unwavering faith named Abram, and amidst the plains of Canaan, the Eternal spoke to him, sealing a destiny that would change the course of humanity with the promise to make of him a great nation and to bless him. These words, coming from heaven itself, echoed like thunderbolts of hope upon Abram's soul, and he believed, allowing the blessing to rest upon him like morning dew, spreading over all he possessed until his name became synonymous with honor, and his tent, once lonely, blossomed into a veritable city of servants, flocks, and life. The sound of sheep mingled with the voices of shepherds and the laughter of children running among the fires at dusk, painting the picture of promised abundance. And with him, his nephew Lot, who had walked beside him from the beginning, also prospered. Yet, as often happens when abundance is not accompanied by wisdom, the land began to grow too small for such weight of blessings, and the seed of discord was born as shepherds argued over wells and men fought for greener pastures, fracturing the harmony that united uncle and nephew like sun-dried clay. Abraham, a man of peace and a wise spirit, realized that such tension could tarnish the promise God had given him. So one calm afternoon, as the wind ruffled the curtains of his tent, he called Lot to his side with the serene gaze of one who trusts completely in the Almighty and said, "I beg you, let there be no strife between you and me, for we are brothers. Is not the whole land before you vast and sufficient for both of us?" In an act of incomparable greatness and humility, the patriarch renounced his right to choose first, a reflection of mature faith that knew no land could contain the true blessing of God. But Lot, surprised by the offer, looked up with eyes that fixed on earthly beauty and saw the Jordan plain stretching out like an emerald carpet beneath the setting sun. Before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, that region was an oasis of life, verdant, fertile and sparkling like the Garden of Eden, a land that whispered promises of success but hid unseen dangers, the kind of beauty that bewitches the eyes and lulls the soul into a deadly slumber. Lot made his decision based on what he saw, choosing for himself the whole plain of the Jordan, and as he gathered his possessions and set out eastward, separating himself from Abraham, he made a gesture that marked the beginning of separate paths, not only geographically but spiritually. Lot's tents grew ever closer to the cities of the plain until he finally settled in Sodom, one of the great centers of that region, which at first glance seemed a blessed place, with stone houses gleaming in the sun, bustling markets and vineyards stretching as far as the eye could see. But the beauty that enchanted the eyes hid a poison that corrupted the soul, for the Bible sternly warns that the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful before the Lord. The city's prosperity had sprung not from justice or gratitude, but from a growing arrogance, a pride that mocked divine laws and gloated in its own corruption, filling the squares with laughter, banquets and luxury, while the city's spirit was dead. The sound of flutes and dances echoed among palaces and taverns. Yet piety, honor and innocence had been driven out like unwelcome strangers, and while gold flowed into the hands of merchants, hunger stalked the poor in a place where the beauty of the plain had become the altar of an idolatry disguised as civilization. The ancient virtue of hospitality, sacred and vital in the Near East where refusing shelter was almost a crime, had been utterly desecrated, replaced by a culture where strangers were ridiculed and violated, the poor were exploited as objects, and compassion was mocked as weakness. Sodom lived under a twisted code, a complete inversion of the moral order where violence was entertainment, the suffering of others was a spectacle, and wealthy men organized cruel games where the weak were forced to fight or die for the amusement of crowds. Immorality was celebrated as a symbol of freedom, and sexual depravity was not an isolated deviation, but the very language of the culture, where violent acts and domination were seen as assertions of power, and temples erected to local gods mixed worship with orgies and human sacrifices, desecrating everything sacred. Evil had become so institutionalized that the Sodomites established laws that actually punished charity, decreeing that whoever gave bread to a hungry person would be punished, and whoever welcomed a stranger would be beaten, creating a society that had severed its last tie with humanity and stood defiantly on the precipice of divine judgment. In Sodom, evil had evolved beyond mere impulse. It had become institutionalized, and sin had been codified into the very law of the land, creating a society where the prophet Ezekiel would centuries later identify the core of this moral collapse, not just in acts of lust, but in a horrifying trifecta of pride, abundance of food, and prosperous idleness that steadfastly refused to strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. It was not merely the sins of the flesh that cried out to heaven, but the utter, calcified corruption of the human heart, where selfishness, indifference, and cruelty had become the city's true religion, and the streets echoed with the jarring dissonance of the laughter of the powerful, drowning out the groans of the oppressed. Judges accepted bribes, leaders ruled solely for their own pleasure, and the name of God was spoken only in mockery, making every feast, every song, and every night of pleasure a defiance of heaven, a collective declaration of spiritual independence, and an open rebellion against the Creator. Day and night, the clamor of their iniquity rose before the throne of the Most High like thick, suffocating smoke, a testimony of a people who had lost even the ability to blush with shame. And amidst this moral decay lived Lot, a man who had chosen visible wealth without realizing he had planted his home and family on the brink of a moral abyss. The superficial beauty of the valley had blinded his eyes to the rot hidden beneath its glitter. For the gold of Sodom obscured judgment, and the sparkle of its festivals masked the decay infiltrating every home and every heart. So as twilight dyed the sky red over the city's towers, Lot remained tragically unaware that his choice, made in the golden light of dusk, would exact a terrible price at the dawn of judgment. While Lot compromised in Sodom, years passed differently for Abraham, who continued his pilgrimage of faith, walking in obedience to the Most High God and learning day after day to trust in eternal promises, growing in communion with the Almighty, until one ordinary day under the scorching sun of Canaan, when the heat made the horizon shimmer like a veil of fire, Abraham, the friend of God, received a visit that would shatter the timeline of history. Sitting at the entrance of his tent, seeking the relief of a rare breeze, he lifted his eyes and saw 3 men standing before him. There was no sound of footsteps in the sand, no announcement of their arrival. They simply stood there, imposing and serene, as if they had descended directly from the fabric of heaven itself. As soon as he saw them, Abraham felt the weight of reverence in his spirit and ran with the vigor of a young man, recognizing the sacred in their presence, prostrating himself on the ground in profound respect before addressing the one who seemed to be the principal among them with a voice trembling with devotion. "My Lord, if I have found favor in your eyes, I beg you, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought to wash your feet, and rest yourselves under this tree, while I bring a morsel of bread to strengthen your hearts." The principal visitor inclined his head in a gesture of divine acceptance, a simple movement that resonated with authority, sending Abraham into a flurry of joyful service as he hurried to the tent to call Sarah, who, even weary with age, promptly began to knead the finest flour, as if she sensed the cosmic importance of the moment. As the aroma of fresh wheat mingled with the warm air, Abraham personally selected a tender calf and gave it to a servant to prepare without delay, for no effort seemed too great to honor these mysterious visitors, and soon, with butter, fresh milk, and the prepared calf set before them, Abraham stood silently under the great tree, watching them eat in a scene of desert hospitality in its purest form, offered unknowingly to the very King of the universe and his angels. After the meal, the atmosphere shifted from light and welcoming to solemn and heavy with purpose, as the Lord revealed the impossible promise that Sarah would have a son within a year, a promise that drew secret laughter which would soon turn into the harbinger of a miracle, before the conversation took a mysterious turn towards justice. 2 of the celestial visitors, now clearly recognized as angels on a divine mission, rose and turned their faces toward the distant horizon in the direction of ill-fated Sodom, their silent steps seemingly carrying the weight of judgment itself. Yet Abraham remained standing before the 3rd visitor, the one he called Adonai, knowing in his heart he was in the living presence of Jehovah, the God of the covenant. The Lord paused, as if reflecting before a decree, and decided to open his mind and heart before his servant in a moment of rare divine intimacy, sharing the secret of his justice with a man, asking, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do, seeing that he shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him?" It was a conversation between the eternal and the man of faith where time seemed suspended, and the Lord revealed that the cities of the plain had crossed every limit, that their transgressions were no longer secrets and their sins no longer bearable, for the sound of their iniquities had reached heaven like a thunderclap of despair. The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great, and their sin is exceedingly grave. It is not an ordinary outcry, but the cry of the oppressed, the stench of violence, and the constant echo of corruption that rises up to me. Therefore I will go down to see if they have acted according to this outcry. Abraham remained silent as the warm evening wind blew between the tents, his heart aching with a sudden shiver at the thought of his nephew Lot living among the wicked, realizing that God's judgment was about to fall like a flaming sword upon those arrogant cities, just as the sun hid behind the mountains, tinging the sky with purple and fire, while the two angels were already walking across the plain, carrying the sentence of doom toward a world asleep in its sin. They advanced with determined steps, enveloped in the fading golden light of twilight, carrying with them a celestial sentence that would soon shatter the world. And it happened, or rather, it was written in the divine plan itself, that Lot, Abraham's nephew, was sitting at the gate of Sodom at that very moment, a solitary figure of conscience in a city that had long since abandoned it. Upon seeing the two travelers, whose human appearance could not fully mask a superhuman dignity, Lot immediately rose, his heart recognizing what his eyes barely comprehended, and he bowed deeply, prostrating his face to the ground in an urgent invitation moved by an instinct of pity, perhaps the last glimmer of faith and hospitality he had retained from his days walking with Abraham. "My lords," he pleaded, his voice laced with a tremor of knowing fear, "please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night. Wash your feet to refresh yourselves from the dust of the road and rest, and in the morning you may continue your journey." The angels, initially intending to test Lot's resolve or simply to observe the city's reaction, politely refused, suggesting the common traveler's alternative of spending the night in the open square. But Lot, who intimately knew the moral darkness and physical dangers lurking in every corner of Sodom when the sun vanished, was alarmed by this idea, for he knew that in Sodom the night did not bring rest, but a predatory hunger. He vehemently insisted, pleading with them and showing a genuine, courageous concern that acted as a spark of light in the encroaching gloom, a rare demonstration of hospitality in a city that scorned it. "My lords, please, I beg you, do not spend the night out here," he urged, and seeing his sincerity, the angels nodded, allowing divine compassion to respond to the insistence of righteousness, and accompanied him through the narrow, darkening streets to his home, where Lot moved with haste and reverence to prepare a feast of unleavened bread. But while peace reigned for a brief, fragile moment inside the house, something sinister began to stir outside as the rumor of the stranger's arrival spread through the streets like a spark in dry straw, turning curiosity into desire and desire into violence until the night air of Sodom began to seethe with voices and footsteps. Men emerged from every corner, from the squares, the taverns, and the rooftops, a growing, merciless crowd driven by the same perversion that infected the entire city, not an isolated group of criminals, but every man from the youngest to the oldest, surrounding the house in a sea of faces distorted by lust and wickedness. Their shadows stretched across the walls like omens of the judgment that was approaching, and the murmur quickly became a clamor as purity found itself under siege, with fists pounding on the door furiously, echoing like thunder through the walls and through Lot's trembling heart. "Lot, where are the men who came to spend the night with you?" they shouted, demanding the impossible with a grotesque request that openly exposed the abyss of their corruption. "Bring them out to us so that we may know them," twisting the Hebrew verb for intimacy into a monstrous declaration of intent to violate and subjugate. It was perversion transformed into a collective spectacle. Sin turned into culture, and evil turned into routine, causing Lot to tremble as fear paralyzed him, seeing the reflection of flickering torches on the distorted faces of men he once called neighbors. Bound by the sacred duty of hospitality, a law older than Sodom itself, and moved by sheer despair, Lot did the unthinkable. He stepped out into the chaos, carefully closing the door behind him to protect his guests, and with a trembling voice he offered a compromise that revealed just how deeply the poison of Sodom had infected his own moral compass. "Please, my brothers, do not act so wickedly," he cried, offering his own daughters in a tragic, desperate bid to save his guests, a horrific testament to a man divided between the faith that remained and the culture that had corrupted him. But the crowd roared in response, "Stand back! This fellow came to sojourn, and he would play the judge." Now we will deal worse with you than with them." And the mob advanced like a living wave, pushing him, threatening him, ready to tear him apart as the wood of the door creaked, about to give way under the pressure of violent violence. Terror enveloped Lot like a veil, but at the exact moment when human hope was extinguished, heaven intervened. The hands of the angels reached through the darkness, grasping Lot with irresistible force and pulling him back inside in a movement as swift as lightning. The door slammed shut with a sound that echoed like a decree from God, signaling that the limit of divine patience had been reached, and immediately afterward, before the mob could even comprehend what was happening, the angels acted, causing the air to vibrate with invisible force as a preliminary judgment was executed. A light, perhaps as intense as the brilliance of the celestial throne itself, or perhaps a sudden supernatural darkness, exploded before the door, striking the men with total blindness, turning their fury into confusion and their shouts into a pandemonium of terror. Before we witness the final fiery destruction of this city, this is the moment to decide where you stand. Join us as we uncover the mysteries of the Bible. Subscribe now to Guardians of the Covenant, like this video, and share it to warn the world, for the judgment is at the door. Whether it was a blinding flash or a silent, terrible spiritual touch, the result was immediate and absolute chaos as the men surrounding the house were struck with total blindness, transforming their fury into a pandemonium of astonished voices where men stumbled over one another, groping the walls and scratching the ground in a vain search for an exit they could no longer see. The sound of despair echoed through the streets, a clamor of a crowd that had lost not only their sight but control of their own souls. For God had allowed the people of Sodom to experience, while still alive, the spiritual darkness they had so long chosen to follow. Inside the house, the peace contrasted sharply with the madness outside, but it was merely the silence that precedes the sentence. For the angels, their countenances now firm with divine authority, turned to Lot with voices like restrained thunder and commanded him to gather anyone who belonged to him in the city. For the outcry reaching the Lord was so great that the destruction of the place was no longer a threat, but an imminent execution. Lot, finally understanding that his guests were executives of a long-delayed judgment, rushed out into the heavy, foreboding night to the houses of his future sons-in-law, pleading with them to leave because the Lord was about to destroy the city, but tragedy struck in the form of disbelief. The young men laughed, thinking Lot was drunk or insane, and their disdainful smiles sealed their fate as they dismissed the warning as an improbable fable, leaving Lot to return home with a heart weighing like stone. This moment of tragic rejection is a mirror to our own times, reminding us that when the warning comes, we must be awake to hear it. So before the fire falls, ensure you are part of our community of truth by subscribing to Guardians of the Covenant, liking this video, and sharing it to awaken others. As the night began to dissolve into a pale, cold glow over the eastern hills, the angels urged Lot to take his wife and daughters and flee immediately lest they perish in the punishment. Yet unbelievably, Lot lingered, paralyzed by a deadly mixture of fear, shock, and a lingering attachment to the comfortable life, the home, and the riches he had built in Sodom, trapped between obedience and nostalgia, while the city slept under the shadow of death. It was then that divine mercy intervened in its most tangible form. For the angels, perceiving the danger of his indecision, did not wait for his consent, but acted out of love for the covenant with Abraham. They seized Lot, his wife, and his daughters by the hand with a powerful, irresistible touch, and physically pulled them out of the city with supernatural force. Led beyond the walls as the first light of dawn tinged the sky with gray and gold, they stood in the silent breath between mercy and fire, where the angel gave a command that cut through the air like a blade. Flee for your life. Do not look back under any circumstances, and do not stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains lest you be destroyed. But the human heart is fragile in the face of the unknown, and Lot, seized by panic, felt fear overpower his faith. Looking at the dark, inhospitable mountains in the distance, he trembled at the thought of solitude and wild beasts, believing the cure to be as terrifying as the disease. With a trembling voice, he pleaded with the angel, "Oh no, my lord, I beg you, though I have found favor in your sight, I cannot flee to the mountains lest disaster overtake me and I die. Look, there is a small town nearby. Let me escape there. Is it not a little one, and my life will be saved?" The angel, gazing at him with an inscrutable expression that combined divine patience with compassion for human limitations, granted this final request, replying, "Very well, I grant you this also. I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. But hurry, escape there, for I can do nothing until you arrive." And so Lot turned his eyes toward that small, almost imperceptible dot amidst the shadows of the plain, a place whose name would be remembered forever as Zoar, the little sanctuary permitted by grace. Zoar, a name which in Hebrew simply means small or insignificant, was destined on that terrifying dawn to become the fortress of life, the only shelter allowed by grace in a world about to be unmade. As the horizon began to bleed with the red hues of morning, Lot and his family ran with their last reserves of strength, their breath ragged, their hearts pounding against their ribs, for they knew that the rising sun would bring with it not warmth, but fire from heaven. The morning wind whistled among the stones, carrying a strange, heavy silence, as if the world itself was holding its breath. And each step towards the gates of Zoar was a desperate struggle between the despair of what they were leaving and the fragile hope of salvation. Then, at the exact moment Lot crossed the boundaries of the city and the sun rose fully over the face of the earth, the restraint of heaven was lifted, and the Lord himself, the righteous judge of all the earth, rained down upon Sodom and Gomorrah a cataclysm of burning sulfur and consuming fire. It was not ordinary fire. It was the concentrated holiness of God confronting the fullness of sin, a divine incinerator that purified by destroying, consuming, not just the buildings but the very roots of iniquity. The fertile plain, once the envy of kings and the desire of Lot's heart, was instantly transformed into a churning sea of flames where the ground trembled, walls collapsed like sand, and the air filled with the terrifying symphony of screams and roaring smoke. God obliterated those wicked cities and the entire surrounding valley, erasing the last trace of their arrogance, their luxury, and their corruption until no inhabitant survived. Neither the mocking youths nor the wealthy merchants, nor even the animals in the fields. The lush vegetation withered and vanished under the fiery storm, replacing green life with grey ash, total and absolute destruction that would echo through the centuries as a warning that what man calls prosperity, God can reveal as decay, and what culture celebrates as freedom, heaven may declare an offense. Amidst this apocalypse, a tragedy unfolded that stands as a chilling monument to spiritual hesitation. Lot's wife, unable to fully break with the past, committed the act that sealed her fate by disobeying the explicit command of the angels. Perhaps it was a longing for her home, an attachment to the life of comfort she was losing, or a fatal curiosity to see the divine fury. But in that single backward glance, judgment overtook her. Her body hardened, her skin became crystalline, and she was transformed instantly into a pillar of salt, a silent, eternal statue erected in the middle of the path between grace and judgment. Her fate is a stark reminder for us today not to let our hearts cling to a world that is passing away. If you want to stay grounded in truth during these turbulent times, make sure you are subscribed to Guardians of the Covenant. Click that like button and share this message so others may learn the lesson of looking forward, not back. The following morning, as the first breath of dawn touched the horizon, Abraham rose early and walked to the place where he had stood before the Lord, his eyes still bearing the shadow of the previous night's revelation. From the heights of Hebron, he looked down and saw the valley that had once shone like the Garden of Eden, now lying in ruins, covered by a thick curtain of smoke that rose in black spirals like the breath of a gigantic furnace. Sodom and Gomorrah were gone, the judgment was complete, and the silence that covered the plain was heavier than the smoke. Abraham realized with a heavy heart that not even 10 righteous people had been found. Yet amidst the horror, he understood that God had remembered him. For the sake of Abraham, God had extended his hand into the fire and pulled Lot out, proving that divine justice is always tempered by mercy for the faithful. Meanwhile, Lot, though physically safe within the walls of Zoar, found no peace. The city seemed too close to the destruction, too small to contain his immense fear, and the trauma of the fire burned within his mind. Driven by a terror that overpowered his reason, fear that the judgment might spread, fear of the locals, and the crushing weight of his own guilt, Lot fled once more, leaving the safety of Zoar to seek refuge in the desolate mountains with only his 2 daughters. There, among the cold rocks and dark cliffs, they found a damp cave, a shelter that offered safety but bred despair. The nights were long and silent. The wind blew through the crevices like an ancient lament, and in that isolation, stripped of his wealth, his wife, and his dignity, Lot sat as a broken man, dejected and aged, watching the world outside that cave as if life itself had ceased to exist, unaware that in the darkness of that cave, a new and twisted chapter of history was about to be written. It was in the suffocating darkness of that mountain cave, a darkness that was as much physical as it was spiritual, that a terrible thought germinated, an unthinkable plan born of fear and the moral distortion inherited from the very city they had just escaped. Faith had been extinguished like a lamp without oil, and in the crushing void where trust in God should have been, reason twisted into madness as Lot's daughters, looking at their exhausted and broken father, whispered to one another with the desperate logic of those who believe they are the last remnants of humanity. "Our father is old," they reasoned, "and there is no man on earth to join us. Our lineage will die, and our name will vanish into the dust," leading them to a decision born not of malice but of profound spiritual blindness. On 2 consecutive nights, under the same sky that had witnessed the judgment of Sodom, sin sowed its new roots in the mountains of Zoar as they offered their father wine, until the anesthesia of alcohol drowned his consciousness, allowing them to lie with him in an act of desperation that would birth the nations of Moab and Ammon, peoples who would rise to become the perennial adversaries of Israel, proving that the consequences of compromise spread like ripples on a dark lake, affecting generations long after the initial act is done. Thus, from the ashes of Sodom and the shadows of the cave, new stories sprouted, not of glory, but of bitter remembrance, reminding us that the error of a single moment can reverberate through centuries. Yet this ancient narrative preserved in the pages of Scripture is not merely a chronicle of failure. It echoes like a moral thunderclap in the conscience of humanity, confronting us with the absolute holiness of God, his intolerance of stubborn sin, and the terrifying certainty of a judgment that, though often delayed by mercy, is perfectly just. However, at the same time, the narrative reveals something equally magnificent: the infinite depth of divine compassion, for even in the face of extreme corruption, the Lord hears the prayer of a righteous man, as seen when Abraham stood alone interceding before the Almighty, discovering that God's mercy is moved by love and covenant. We contemplate God's impressive patience, his willingness to spare a multitude for the sake of 10, and his active grace in physically dragging Lot and his family to safety, even when they hesitated, paralyzed between faith and fear. This story serves as an uncomfortable mirror to our own nature, revealing the deadly danger of compromising with the world. Lot chose the valley for its beauty and easy prosperity, but his decision to live within wickedness stained his soul, proving that sin, when tolerated, does not remain at a distance but infiltrates and devours. The most haunting symbol of this truth remains Lot's wife, whose solitary figure hardened into salt stands as an eternal warning against spiritual hesitation, a silent cry to all centuries that whoever loves the world loses their life, but whoever obeys finds salvation. It is no coincidence that the apostles and Christ himself turned their eyes to Sodom as a prophetic example. Peter recalls that God reduced those cities to ashes to warn the ungodly while rescuing the righteous Lot, showing the inseparable sides of divine action, judgment that purifies and salvation that redeems. The Lord Jesus, in his supreme authority, warned that on the day of judgment it will be more tolerable for Sodom than for those who reject the message of salvation, and he left us with 3 devastatingly powerful words. Remember Lot's wife. This is a direct warning against attachment to possessions, pleasures, and the illusions that bind us when the decisive moment approaches, urging us not to look back with longing for a condemned world, but to look forward to the Redeemer. As we stand on the brink of our own generation's challenges, do not let your heart be divided. Make a choice today to stand with the truth by subscribing to Guardians of the Covenant, liking this video, and sharing this message to sound the alarm. Ultimately, the smoke of Sodom reminds us that everything in this world, power, beauty, wealth, is destined to pass away, but the grace of God remains forever, offering us a refuge better than Zoar, a salvation secure in Jesus Christ, who extends his hand before the fire falls to lead us not just to safety, but to eternal life. The story of Sodom is not merely a record of ancient violence, but a flawless mirror reflecting our own generation, an urgent summons to conscience that reminds us the time of divine patience has a limit. We are called to abandon the illusion of earthly comfort and run, not to a city like Zoar, but to the only true refuge, the living God. Like Abraham, we must stand firm in a corrupted land, separated from the world yet interceding for it, fleeing the evil that surrounds us without ever looking back with longing at what heaven has condemned. For while power, beauty, and wealth are destined to fade like smoke, the grace of God revealed in Jesus Christ remains forever. He is the Savior who extends his hand before the fire falls, calling us not just to escape destruction, but to inherit a glory that never perishes. If this message has awakened your spirit, do not let the moment pass. Join our community of truth seekers by subscribing to Guardians of the Covenant, like this video, and share it to help others find the true refuge before the final day dawns.